microbiome careers. So today we'll be joined by four people that are some currently in academia, some in industry. And this is supposed to be a discussion, so we'll be discussing really about microbiome careers. So next slide, please. So first, what is the Microbiome Centers Consortium? So this panel is brought to you by the Microbiome Centers Consortium Early Career Working Group. The MCC is a cooperative and inclusive collaborative network of microbiome centers that are around the nation. So there's about more than 30 or more than 50, I think, participating centers around the US that aim to accelerate the understanding of all microbiomes. So the MCC does share and develop intellectual, educational, and technical resources and promote common adoption of data standards and ethical guidelines as the field of microbiome science moves from discovery to translation. So if you'd like to learn more about the MCC and maybe convince your center at your university to join, you can click the link in the chat, and I'm pretty sure there's a sign up there. In the meantime, if everyone would like to introduce themselves in the chat, you can just state your name. Are you what field you're in? Are you in industry? Are you in academia? And what institution you're from? We'll love to hear from you. And then we'll start with the introduction of our panelists today. So I'll start with me. My name is Kimberly Ndlovu. I am a current PhD candidate at Ohio State University. I graduated from my bachelor's of biological sciences at a small liberal arts college in Missouri Valley College in 2019. And I started my PhD in 2020, where I am studying the vaginal microbiome of pregnant people living with HIV. And why I'm attending this panel today is I really would like to share my experiences in the past 6 years, really, or in the past 10 years, really, since I started my bachelor's. And also to learn from others that are a little bit advanced in my field, and from you guys that are attending as well. You might have knowledge to share. Yeah, thank you. And so we'll move on to our next panelist, Dr. Katrina. Do it. Oh, you're muted, Katrina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Katrina DeWitt. Just like Kimberly, my career in microbiome science has taken me about 10 years. I actually just finished my doctorate at Duke University, where I was looking at abiotic and biotic drivers of microbial communities and how their structure and function. I did my bachelor's of science as well as my master's of science in biology at Rutgers University Camden. My background is kind of interesting because I've started off really as a community ecologist who was originally using plants. And throughout my PhD, I got way more into the microbial community. I currently have just started a job I've been at now for just a little bit over a month, and I am actually doing tree fruit. And so what I mean by that is I am actually in charge of South Jersey tree fruit industry, in which I'm directly helping farmers understand diseases that may be affecting their tree fruit. So I'm identifying different microbial diseases that are affecting different fruit, like apples. And what I'm doing is I'm identifying that, and then I'm actually able to give recommendations to the farmers on how can they eradicate that disease in their orchards, how to manage that disease. And so a lot of that plays not only into fighting these microbial diseases, but also making sure that we are managing any resistance that could be occurring in those fields. I really am involved in this panel because I've had this really kind of interesting pathway into science. I'm a first generation student. I was a low income student. And so just like Kimberly, I really want to impart with everyone kind of my background. If I can help in any kind of way, I'd love to help. It's been 10 years. So let me share with you what I know, and hopefully I can help.
Hi, everyone. My name is Garrett. I kind of started in the microbiome as a PhD student, but kind of led into that as a bachelor's student where I was just not that interested in models, like model microbes. But I was very interested in, microbial diversity and various they just do a lot of cool stuff. And so as a PhD student, I looked at microbes basically in soils and how they were essentially constraining greenhouse gas cycling. And while I thought this was pretty neat, um, I think a lot of us appreciate that we go where the opportunity is. And I found a postdoc kind of applying a similar formula in the Netherlands, more focused on how to improve wastewater treatment with fundamental science. Um, it was right in the middle, like I started in COVID, so I ended up becoming much more computational than I expected. That led me down to gaining some new expertise with emerging technologies. But I also wanted to try to kind of make sure I still had somewhat lab skills with some kind of biochemistry tests that were informed by genomes that I was working with in these reactors. And now I have a kind of unusual role and as a core facility bioinformatician at a large university, and a kind of secondary role as someone who really tries to help bring new people into the microbiome realm. And so I think I was interested in this panel because I think we're all familiar with having plenty of wet lab cores that may do DNA extractions, but metabolomics, some chemistry, maybe they're not at your university but you likely know someone who has access to one of these cores. And so I wanted to be kind of an inside perspective, and also as a service provider in a sense, rather than a kind of classical academic, but somewhat business-ish within the academic setting. And then that's me.
So, hi everybody. I'm Riccardo Farinella, and currently I'm a postdoc from the University of Pisa in Italy. And it seems like I'm the outlier now. Uh, well, basically, my background is based on human genetic epidemiology mostly and pharmacogenetics, but I had the opportunity to uh, also deal with microbiome during my PhD. There was a nice project focusing on the meconium microbiome, so the microbiome of newborns. And this is a very understudied field. So it was really interesting. And now I'm still dealing with microbiome, but in a completely different setting. So uh, in, let's say, in pancreatic cancer research, we are trying to identify microbial biomarkers for predicting the response to the chemotherapy of patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And the reason why I joined this panel, and more generally the MCC, is that I think the microbiome field is extremely multidisciplinary. So you need a lot of a lot of knowledge from different fields, and you have to connect with others. You have to network. You have to learn a lot from the others, and also to share. And basically, that's the reason why, some of the reasons why I'm here.
Well, thank you everybody for your introductions. I'm the moderator for this. I'd like to begin the chat with a overarching question to all of you guys. For your origin, what first drew you guys into microbiome science, and how has your path evolved since then?
How would you like us to answer? Do you want us to kind of go in order or just start talking and whoever answers first gets to go?
I think, Garrett, since you answered the question with a question, you get to answer first, and we can go from there.
Okay, I volunteer. Yeah, I don't I don't know if like microbiome, the phrase existed when I started my PhD, or at least I didn't know of it. But as I said, I was very interested in the diversity of organisms and also, you know, the yeah, no, like avoiding the simple questions, I guess, or perhaps the what I thought of as kind of minutia. You know, there's a lot of like biochemistry, protein fold changes, and that just simply didn't interest me. Um, not that it's not exciting and valuable, but it was not my cup of tea. And so I was looking for something different, but still in the microbial world. And at some point, I realized that, you know, microbes were like everywhere and they're involved in everything. And so why not try to get a more holistic understanding of them and what they do in whatever setting. And so I think that's kind of what led me into microbiomes is trying to get a, you know, more holistic picture of yeah, just the world around me. And there was good opportunities when I started my PhD to do that. So I think that's kind of my entrance to the microbiome realm.
I can go next. So honestly, like Garrett, I sort of stumbled into microbiome research. So when I started my PhD program, I had a choice of projects that I could work on. And again, I was very, very open when I came. I was like, I just want to do research, whatever's available, that's what I want to do. Um, and luckily there was this project in collaboration with another PI in our department that looks specifically at the vaginal microbiome of pregnant people living with HIV from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I feel like that project specifically called out to me because I am from Zimbabwe, so I wanted to work on research that would help improve, you know, the lives of people from similar cultures that I'm from. And so yeah, that's sort of how I stumbled into microbiome science, and I've fallen in love with it ever since. It's been very, very fun exploring what is there and what is known, what is not known about that research, as well as, you know, exploring just what companies are interested in, like in particularly in human microbiome research as well. Yeah.
I'd like to ask Dr. Katrina. I see you unmuted yourself. I was going to ask you this. Going from where you began to now working with fruit trees in, I think, New Jersey is what you said.
Yes.
How has that path been for you?
Yeah, so it's something that's really interesting. I've always done a lot of like fundamental research. I've never been very applied, so that's something really new. I want to briefly touch, I guess, on the last question to kind of hone in on this question, mainly because my background, especially from my undergrad, was very ecology based, very chemistry based. I worked a lot with understanding like elemental content of plant tissue and how the environment kind of changed that. And one of the things that I was looking at, the plant community that I was looking at was actually Sarracenia purpurea, which is a carnivorous plant. And this particular carnivorous plant forms pitchers and it fills with water. And at the time I was doing my master's, I spent a lot of time in the field looking at these plants, collecting environmental parameters. And a part of my master's, I had a TA. And I was paired with microbiology, which at the time was very interesting because, you know, there was only so many students. We all got split up and everybody thought I kind of drew the short stick with micro because when it comes to teaching micro, you know, there was a lot that has to get done. Like I was in charge of prep for that class. So like I had to prep all the material, I had to keep all the bacterial stocks like going. But that actually really changed the pathway of my career because I had to be in that lab doing this work. And then I was in the field looking at this plant that, you know, was hosting this microbiome inside of it. And that really pushed me when I was looking at, you know, a PhD, kind of what I want to do. And that's how I end up kind of in the microbial world, just based off of interest of what I was thinking. And I had no previous background in the microbial world. I really have thought about things in terms of broader questionings. So I really was curious about, why does the environment select for organisms that live there and how do they compete with each other for resources? And it just so happened I was doing that with plants and I got interested in microbes. And so the microbes really have been an interesting way. And with that, I've kind of gone back and forth. You play many hats when you're a scientist. And so a lot of my questions have been found it in ecology, but I recognize that there's a lot of my potential that can directly help people, whether that be with disease impact of like antibiotic resistant genes increasing in nature, and now to my current job where I'm doing something very applied, and it's very different because I'm no longer making those connections like where before I was broadly making connections of, well, I have these plants that are outside, they host as microorganisms. We know that with temperature, we're going to see an increase of bacterial biomass that could lead to more disease, that could lead to more genes that are related to ABR, that could lead to more horizontal gene transfer of ABR. And now I'm doing something where I'm actually in the field. I'm identifying, there is a problem here. This problem is in 20% of your fruit. You have something like a brown rot or a black rot of this apple. So what can we do about that? And what fungicide, usually these are diseases of fungi that are affecting these fruit. What fungicide can we use to, either systemically kill things, make sure they're not growing? How can we manage that better to help the farmer potentially save money or save crops? I'm involved in integrated pest management now, so that's really identifying when there's a problem and how to effectively deal with it. That way, we're saving farmers, time and money. We're looking at when a problem is actually economically an issue. And so now I'm in this world it's very different of being applied. And so far it's been very interesting. It's been very nice. We sit with our microbiome science, a lot of times we're in that lab, we're doing our bioinformatic work, and we want to help people. And we do in the long run because we're doing these studies. But right now I'm in the field and I interact with farmers on a daily basis. And it's really interesting to, see the reactions and see them, talk to me about a problem they have because they might not realize exactly what's happening in their field, but they know that there's an issue and they really do want to know what to do with it. And they really do care about antibiotic resistance to pesticides because they want to be able to, make their pesticides last. They want to be able to not spray so much to, kill off a disease. They want to make sure they're managing things appropriately. So it's been quite interesting.
I'd like to bridge that off to the next question. And hopefully, Ricardo, you can answer this question. Which skills, technical, communication, or otherwise, have been most valuable in your career?
Well, uh, it's a very important question. I think, first of all, that you cannot rely only on a few specific set of skills. You have to try your best to increase, how to say, your asset, specifically in the field of microbiome, because you can really jump from uh, ecological studies of microbiomes in a specific niche to the applied biomedical field. And so you may need to uh, reason in terms of statistical significance of the analysis. You have to think about the informatic requirements that are necessary to undergo your analysis, your lab skills. So you have to be able to do all the steps. For example, at the time that I started working on the microbiome, we were not able to rely on facilities for most of the lab techniques because it was too costly for us. So we had to learn how to do everything and how to do it well in a proper way. So you need to understand and learn a lot of things, but also to communicate, because obviously even though this is more general as a skill, not only related to the microbiome, but you have to also disseminate your findings. You have to be able to express your results, not only for the for the colleagues in the scientific field, but also to the general public. As Katrina was saying earlier, for example, you have to communicate with farmers, you have to communicate with patients if you are involved in the biomedical research, or whatever you are doing, you have to be able to communicate your results. This is probably an underrated skill, but I think it's very, very important. And the way to learn all these things is to do it, to try and to talk to other colleagues, to other scientists, researchers, and so on. I think this is a very important thing.
Thank you for answering that. Garrett, you said that you work in a microbiome center, and so I was hoping you could relay a little bit more information on what your day-to-day for that is and how your communication skills might have grown as a result of being in such a role.
Yeah, I think this kind of follows well from the last question. In some sense, my technical skills helped me find this job. There were several other strokes of luck involved. But yeah, it's kind of also interesting because the skill that I would say that I kind of stand out the most with is not one that's really being used. But I'm hoping that would change. But other skills that I have are being used, and so but these I think a lot of people could do that have kind of basic microbiome science expertise and a little bit of seasoning, some experience. That being said, I would say communication is super important. Not even just in science, but like in life in general, I would say communication is always very important. But yeah, so I think specifically communication is really important in this kind of bioinformatics as a service, especially for kind of a very niche domain such as microbiomes, that we are still kind of learning how to communicate like what we do well enough to our users so that they have informed expectations as to what they might get from us. Microbiomes, there's several different major approaches. A lot of them have similar kind of analytics, which is what I think our general offering is. But if you work with marker genes and you want to talk about alpha diversity, and then you get a new data set that's a genome resolved metagenome, and you want to look at alpha diversity, those are going to look very different and are going to mean very different things. And so I think this is being able to communicate and build expectations and talk about what data mean and what people can do with data, especially when they're new to a field, is a consistent challenge that we're always trying to improve upon. Let me see, what else was in the question? Day to day, man, there's a lot of meetings, but this is kind of for everyone. I do a bit of coding. I do a lot of emails to supervisors, to some of our users, to other analysts. I go and try to kind of almost sell our service every once in a while to individuals one-on-one, say, hey, you've mentioned that you're interested in trying to add, learn about microbiomes and how you could use them. Let's talk about your experimental design, and how this might help you answer your research questions. What is appropriate approach, without and we, since we're within a university, we don't really we can't actually make money. And so we build relationships instead. And so that's where I think it will be very different from a classic industry setting, where it's very transactional, but we try to build more of a relationship. And so managing these relationships, making sure that novices, we treat them well and make sure that we're giving them robust data and that they understand what it is. That's a major portion of my day to day, I would say. I don't think it looks too different from everyone else. I think often it's this more transactional, somewhat more transactional exchanges that I have with scientists, but I think it's also kind of fun because maybe it was obvious or not, but I just like to learn about a lot of different things in the microbiome world. And so I get, dog FMTs, burn wounds, oceans. It's really quite fun to have this kind of almost service where I get to just learn a little bit about a lot of things. And then with complications in the academic settings, they also spilled over into the industry, but I think I'm learning some more translational skills that could be valuable. At least I hope so, and this is, essentially like almost account and project management. So making sure that we talk to people and then, having clear start and end points for any given project and communicating the whole way through that, I think is going to be useful regardless of where I end up next year or in 5 years.
We have a question from the audience that maybe Dr. Katrina or Ricardo can answer with regards to communication skills in general. Are there any instances of excellent or poor communication that you've seen, and how do you deal with these instances?
Okay, I may start. I think it also depends on, let's say, the role that you have. For example, as a PhD student who wants to apply for a postdoc, it was my experience. So this is the first example. What you have to be able to communicate at best is that you are able to manage a project. You know how to do the things. So it's probably more in terms of how much you're confident and able to perform a study. But let's say going on, more experienced researchers that I talked to, well, they said that this changed in time. So what you need to better do in terms of communication is to convince people with money to give you the money to perform the study. So you don't have to demonstrate that you can do the thing. You have to demonstrate and communicate that your research group, that your lab is well equipped, or that your experience in the field, not the technical experience in the sense that I can do an alignment between DNA sequences and the reference database. It's more like I'm able to, sorry, it's my cat. And it's more than you have to be able to uh, instruct your audience that you can perform the study because of resources that are available and less than technical things you can do. So I don't know if you want to add others.
Yeah, that is Yeah, that is really great advice, Ricardo. I think even so, we talk a lot about communicating, and in this instance, we just talked a lot about communicating like to our audience what it is we're interested in doing, why that's important. I think on the other hand, I there's some other ways that makes good communication. One, like right now, I'm talking to farmers, and these farmers, you have to be able to describe to them what's happening. So like I basically go out into the field, I look at their orchard and I take a bunch of numbers down. Like I count how many different insects or a pest and diseases that I'm seeing. And I get pretty much like what is their percent injury of fruit in their orchard. And a lot of these farmers, some of them are new farmers. Some of them haven't been doing it very long. They don't know what these number means at all. So I have to do a good job at, directly talking to that person of telling them, this is what we're seeing. Don't panic. This number, it might seem high to you, but it's not at my threshold. So don't go out and do something yet to your farm or to your orchard. Wait a little bit longer. I'm actually monitoring this. And so a lot of communication is telling them, is really explaining to them what I'm telling them because I don't want them to panic. It's very easy for you to say, well, I saw XYZ, but somebody might not understand what that means. So you might need to give them more background towards that. And on the other hand of that, good communication is great. And I think one of the things we also have to be able to communicate is when we need help. I think we get so far, like, 'cause we want to trust ourselves and we know what we're doing, but every now and then something is gonna like pop up and we're not gonna be super confident about how to handle something. And I know for me, I've always like, I want to figure out that solution. Like, I never wanted to go to my PhD advisor and say, I can't figure this out. I've always wanted to, I've tried plan A through 100 and something is just not working. And so for myself, I've had to get really good at being able to communicate when it is I actually need help and what I need help with. And once I was able to do that, things can run a lot more smoothly, especially on say like a bioinformatic side, because that is a lot of knowledge to know. And it's some of that information is not super readily available for you to read about on the internet. Don't get me wrong, the internet got me very far with bioinformatics, but for somebody who does that on a daily basis, there's not always going to be an answer. And so being able to communicate and talk to somebody and say, I need help, I'm not sure about this, and being able to communicate what that is a lifesaver. It helped me a lot during my PhD, especially when it came to that bioinformatics, pipeline of analyzing my data.
Hi, Dr. Katrina. There's another follow-up question by Corey, kind of speaking on your current role. Um, how did you take, because you had mentioned before that you didn't have much of a applied experience in science. So how do you take your skill set that you have and enter such a role where you're constantly talking to these landowners when there's a lot of these jobs that do ask for community experience or applied research experience?
Yeah, so this is one example where I actually knew the community very well. So I'm very lucky I was able to land a job in my hometown. And so I moved back from my PhD to where I grew up, which was Southern New Jersey. And so in an instance for this job, when it was dealing with, farmers in South Jersey, I had the experience of, through high school, I worked on a farm. So I do have previous farming knowledge where I've interacted with farmers. And so in this case, for this extension job, I was suited very well because I already knew, the land. I knew a lot of the farmers, even if it wasn't personally. Like I've been to their farms, I've done something there. And so, um, I might not have worked in agriculture during for my research experience, but I did work in agriculture for about 10 years, all the way through high school, through my master's. Actually, I was working on a small 60-acre fruit and vegetable farm part-time just because, I liked it, I needed the money. And so I learned a lot about agriculture practices as well as IPM. And so my background in microbial world, which is, knowing about microbial communities and knowing that they might lead to disease, was very well suited for being able to recognize that disease in the field because I had so much field experience and then knowing how to like mitigate things like resistance. And so in this case, it just worked out really well because I knew the land and I've known agriculture, just not necessarily from a research side. So in an example like this, I would say it's good just to get out into, you know, the community, talk to people. If you're interested in agriculture, there's local farm markets. Those are actual farmers that go there every week and they're selling, you know, their produce, and just going there and talking to them, or you know, meeting with them to say, hey, I'm interested in agriculture. Farmers love the talk. They do. They love the talk. The joke is that they sit on tractors all day, so they don't get to talk to anyone. So they love when somebody is actually very interested in hearing about what they do or why they do it. And so in the agriculture industry, I think it's actually pretty easy to get somebody to talk to you and kind of, you know, walk you through extension roles, because it extension roles play a very big part in the community.
Thank you for that answer. Maybe a general question that we can start with Kim and work our way up to the rest of the panelists. In the current scientific climate, while exploring different avenues of career, whether it be government, industry, or academia, how do you navigate that? Is there a push for one direction over another? And how do you navigate that versus potential future changes that might occur?
So right now, I feel like it's sort of, I'm still personally at a waiting point of like, how are things gonna go? Okay, like what's gonna happen? For me personally, my goal has always been to go into industry, working at a biotech or something like that. But right now I've actually uh requested to extend my PhD for another year. Part of it is also because I just recently got my samples that I'm really excited to actually analyze for the next year. But I've extended my PhD for another year, just to sort of wait out what's been happening right now in America. Um, but from what I've seen from people that I've talked with, um you know, the advice is still the same again because people are not really sure about what's happening. um I hope that answers your question. I'm pretty sure some other people can chime in, perhaps they have a better insight.
Uh, I'll add something. I don't have any better insight. I don't think I've been in an academic setting forever, but um, yeah, I think it's a little bit of a struggle right now for a lot of biotech. Um, you know, there's a lot of exchange, but you know, part of your training is, you know, it feels like we have blinders on a lot when we're a PhD and we're kind of set up often to stay in academia, but you do build a lot of skills that are valuable outside of academia. So I would just say, you know, don't keep your blinders on, kind of be open, go where the opportunities are. Um, uh, you know, maybe you'll get lucky and you know, find something that's perfect. Maybe you have to wait a little while and do something that's not as ideal. Um, uh, but yeah, it's hard to like wait for something perfect, um, because you might wait forever. You as a PhD student, as a bachelor student, as a whatever student postdoc, you are gaining lots of valuable skills, even if it's not obvious. And so don't be afraid to apply those and to where it could be useful for your career trajectory, whatever direction that may be.
I love what Garrett just said, which was about kind of keeping your opportunities open. I just graduated with my PhD in July. I was very scared about what was going to happen. I think from the 2024 to 2025 academic year, I probably applied to over 300 jobs. You know, they tell you to start applying 6 months before graduating, pretty much. And it's a struggle. And I have to say that I am really one of the lucky people that have graduated. I got 4 job offers. which is outstanding right now. I'm shocked by how many I got. And so I was in a very lucky position where I did, in fact, I got to pick the job that I'm currently doing, which is a great feeling. And I think it's important, this comes back to communication of, being able to communicate you and your skills and how they apply to different job settings. I don't know if any of us actually really want to know what we do when we grow up. We follow what interests us. And so when I was looking, I knew I needed a job and many things interested me. So I did. I put things out there all over for academics, for industry, for government. I put jobs applications out for everything. So much so that I was like, I'm currently in my fruit IPM role. I did get an offer actually for an assistant professor of teaching at a community college. And I also got a postdoc offer of experimental engineering. And so you can see that all three of those roles right there, very different from each other. I've gotten very good at communicating myself and how I might fit into different roles because I know that what I've done has been very varied and I do have a lot of skills that are applied very broadly. And so when we're talking about communication, it's not just about what you do, but who you are as well, because you do fit into a lot of roles. And if you keep yourself kind of open and if you have this mindset of, well, I just want this one job at this one company, you might have to wait a while and maybe eventually you'll get it. It's hard out there. We don't know. So keep yourself open. Find what interests you. Because if you find something that interests you, you're not going to be upset about what you're doing day to day because there is something that is going to be interesting to you in that role.
I guess a general question maybe to the more senior people here in the panel. How do you balance work with things that let you disassociate from your work?
I'll put my 2 cents in real quick. It's way easier once you've gotten your PhD. Before then, it's very tough. After that, well, yeah, postdocs are also hard. It's really hard. I don't have any good advice until you've kind of gotten through those, and then you can have a salary and say, "Oh, I did my 8 hours, or 9 hours, I'm done." It's really nice. So get to that point, but know that it may be a struggle to get there. Yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, that's a very, very hard question. And I don't feel I have an answer. I think that probably this is a very subjective point. I mean, based on what you do, on who you are, also, you may find a different way from another person. So I think this may change quite a lot in different contexts and between different people.
And then Connor has a question regards to microbiome work available in environmental or other non-medical subfields. Maybe Kim, who you've been looking at jobs, or Katrina or Ricardo, who have also been landing in different positions. What kind of field work have you been seeing out there?
Um, so I have not seen much personally, particularly with environmental microbiomes, but I know ExxonMobil is a really good company that you can look into. I know someone who works there who graduated from our program actually. But it might not particularly be microbiome related. But yeah, you're right. North Carolina, I know they have like SC Bio, which covers North Carolina and South Carolina as well. It is mostly medical and pharmaceutical focused. I have not really come across any, or I can't think of one off of the top of my head right now that focused on environmental microbiome. But ExxonMobil is a good one. That's a good company.
So, environmental microbiology jobs are certainly fewer than what you would see more medical ones. But as somebody who just spent the last 5 years in North Carolina, I can tell you those jobs do exist. They are just far and few in between. One of the things I would say for North Carolina is definitely look at state jobs. There are a lot of state jobs that are more environmental, like water testing. I thought I saw one just the other day because, I still haven't got out of the habit of just looking at what jobs are potentially out there. If I see it again, I will definitely put it in the chat, but I definitely recommend looking through, state positions. I know there are some companies in the RTP that are more environmental scientist hiring. So I would just, keep looking out there because they are there. They're more likely going to say environmental scientist. And then this is one of those cases where I would say maybe it's not directly microbiology related, but at some point, I guarantee you microbiology will come up in it. And in that case, you're relying more on your ecology or environmental science skills. But they're definitely there. And yeah, thank you, Madalena, for just talking about the environmental biome, the triangle for agriculture as well as soil environmental water quality. That's awesome. Another company that I will talk about is BSAF. BSAF is in the triangle region, and I know they actually do a rotating kind of industry postdoc program. It's one of those things where you do have to move around. I think every 12 months they'll place you somewhere new, but they're also a really big player in like the agriculture industry or environmental sciences as well as like the medical field.
I would also not discount food industry. It's medical related, but even Katrina, I think, like agriculture, but also there's a lot of fermented food, and that's microbial. So don't discount that. I know this is a kind of focus on a certain region, but like a formative experience for me was like going and doing science at a NASA facility, like microbiome stuff at a NASA facility. So like space, computers, like microbiomes are everywhere. There are a lot more medical ones. It doesn't hurt to take that opportunity if it comes. But yeah, the non-medical stuff is certainly fewer.
But also in NES, as you mentioned, I think there are also opportunities for the application of microbiome related studies for terraformation or something similar to modify the moon soil and so on. So I think is going to expand dramatically in the next few years.
Well, thank you everybody for those questions and the panelists for all the answers. I think if this, we should talk about the next panel. I don't know if Kim, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so we will be having our next panel November 7th at the same time, 3 to 4 p.m. So this panel will have people that are actually in sort of a beyond, the circle of academia and industry. So we have a research biologist, Dr. Shale, who works at an aquarium, which I thought was really cool. And then we have Dr. Corey Wiesner. She's an associate professor at Arizona State. And then we also have Dr. Jenny Starr, who is the head of marketing at Nestle. So if you guys want to go ahead and scan to register for the next panel, which will be about a month from now. And we would love to hear your feedback. And if you want to suggest more people that you want to see on this panel, that would be great. So there's a feedback link in the chat.
For those of you who might have more questions, feel free to stick around. Or you can always email any of us. I'm sure all of us would be very happy to chat with you more one-on-one if you'd like. Just let us know. But thank you so much for, coming to our first panel. We plan to have a host of these coming out throughout the academic year. So yeah, please take your time to give us some feedback, and we hope to see you next time.